Alamo Corp issued a new series of bonds on January 1993. The bonds were sold at par and had a 12% semi-annual coupon. And they will mature in 30 years on December of 2022. So what was the yield to maturity on the bonds on the date the bonds were issued? So what would be, in other words, an original investor what would have earned? And we're going to try to find it using or solving for a rate. Okay, so we start from easy to more difficult. We know that the bond has a face value of 1,000. Then we know that the 12% semi-annual coupon rate, so this bond pays 12% times 1,000, but this is paid twice a year because it's semi-annual, so it pays, instead of paying 120 per year, it pays half every 6 months, so 60 every 6 months. Then we have the number of periods are 30 years when the bonds were first issued, and we have to multiply these times 2 because we have twice as many semi-annual periods in 30 years. And the bond is were originally sold at par, so we would put as a negative 1,000 and then solve for rate. The rate on these bonds is, as you can guess, the bond sells at par or the present value is the same as the future value, so the rate will be the same as the coupon rate. So the yield to maturity would be 6%. However, we have to multiply this 6% times 2 in order to get the annualized yield to maturity. So the final answer would be 12% per year with semi-annual compounding. It's not 6%, it's 6% every 6 months. So we have 60 6 months period, 6% every 6 months, and $60 every 6 months of interest. So we have to make sure that number of periods, I over Y, or the yield or the interest rate, and the payment, they all have the same base period. So they all refer to semi-annuals in this case. In part B of the problem, we assume that 5 years have gone by and that now we have interest rate that fell to 10%. So the situation is better for the company. We used to have 30 years, now we have 25 years, and the interest rate dropped, market rate dropped from 12% to 10%, meaning 5% every 6 months. The question is, what's the price? No, so this thing has not changed. The coupon payment and the face value of the bond has not changed, but we've solved for price, and what we find is that the price of this bond is 1182, meaning this bond is selling currently at a premium. So the last part of this question asks, now that 5 years have gone by, what's the current yield, the capital gains yield, and the total yield on 5 years later, now after the bond was issued? And the yield to maturity, that was the original one, but the yield to maturity on the new one is fairly easy to find. It's just multiply the semi-annual yield times 2, we get the YTM of 10% with semi-annual compounding. The question now becomes, what's the capital gains yield and the current yield? So let's look at the formula. We know that the current yield is just the payment over price. So we have a $60 payment. However, we got this twice a year. So we multiply times 2 and we divide over the price. And let me just change this to a negative sign. So we get the answer is going to be a positive number. And the difference between the yield to maturity and the current yield gives us the capital gains yield. So in this case, we have a capital gains loss of 0.15% per year. And it makes sense because the value of a premium bond declines over time. So we are making more in our coupon, our interest is higher than the 10%, but we lose a portion of it from the depreciation in the value of the bond as time passes by.